Well, I think it's a fair assumption that the ground war will continue, no matter what we've heard from Donald Trump. And it's interesting. We might get into that, but we're going to see more of the same until one side or other takes that initiative back again. Now, the Russians are adapting their tactics. They're adapting their tactics in the front line. They've brought in their meat grinder tactics. They've changed the way their squads fight because they've run out of equipment. They're running out of experienced troops, experienced commanders. And we're seeing adaptations in the way they deal with things, and they're overwhelming the Ukrainian defenses. The Ukrainians are adapting their defenses, but we have to recognize the massive size of the front line that they're trying to defend against. This is the equivalent of Aberdeen to London. If we were putting it in UK terms, that's massive. That is very, very difficult for any military to be able to defend against, because if you're being attacked at all different levels, you're spread very thinly. So we're likely to see in that eastern part no massive changes, I think, in the front lines until I suspect we will see the Ukrainians planning potentially some form of armoured formation maneuver, midsummer-ish against the Russians. But that will only happen if they get additional armoured engineering resources and they get additional air power. That's in, and this is the infamous F-16s that started to come in through 2024. But the need to have sufficient capability to be able to properly push the Russian Air Force and aviation forces back, and to provide that tactical support to troops on the ground so that they can get through the defences in a way that they're not being destroyed on the defences by the Russians in direct and indirect fire against them, which is how defences should be. Whether they're going to have the wherewithal in 2025 to do that or not, I don't know. I suspect what we'll see through 2025 again are more daring operations like Kursk from Syrskyi and Budanov to try and dislocate the Russians again, whether we'll see just one as we have with Kursk or whether we'll see several and have them properly linked. I would hope there would be several and have them linked. I suspect that the Ukrainians will have only the ability to do one again, and they'll choose their time and space to try and dislocate Putin, and that will be linked to what's going on geopolitically.
Well, just finally on the geopolitics, obviously we've been focusing mainly today on the ground war, but let's talk about the geopolitics just to finish. Let me put a scenario to you, Philip, and see if you buy it. I think there is a chance that in the new year, Donald Trump takes office, he tries to pressure Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table, but Putin will not feel in a position to acquiesce to the demands that Trump is making. Mm-hmm. Trump will be very conscious of the fact he doesn't want a repeat of Joe Biden's disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. Yep. He doesn't want something equivalent happening on his watch. And he will also be conscious of the fact that Vladimir Putin has been weakened by recent events in Syria. Mm-hmm. And he will be sensitive to the charge that he is somehow Putin's lapdog. Mm-hmm. And so he may react angrily to Putin refusing to come to the negotiating table, and as a result, ramp up arms for Ukraine. Do you think that's viable?
I think that's very viable. I think that if you had to ask me what was probable, I'd say that's probable. And if you look at what's going on at the moment in the diplomatic manoeuvring before Trump takes over on the 20th of January, the conditions are being set for that. Trump has talked to Putin and talked to Zelensky. Zelensky's response is to come up with a plan, to go to Trump at his Mar-a-Lago estate and present that plan to him and go through it. And as part of that plan, it's come out in the negotiation, in the reporting of it, he said, "I'd be willing to give up some of the territory temporarily if it stops the fighting, so that I can then get that back diplomatically in the future." And therefore, he is being Mr. Cooperative when it comes to Trump's idea of there being a negotiated settlement. Putin, when the phone call went in between Trump and Putin's team, through Peskov, denied, and that's his spokesman, denied that a phone call had ever happened. And then immediately after that, we started to see across Russian national television naked pictures of Melania Trump plastered everywhere. We have to look at Putin's psyche. Putin's psyche is an old intelligence officer. That broadcast across Russian national television of Donald Trump's wife was him threatening him and turning around and saying, from a petulant perspective, I didn't like our conversation. It didn't go the way I expected it to go, and now I'm going to threaten you. Trump's not going to listen to that. He's going to respond really quite angrily to that. And I think we're going to see a ramping up of his rhetoric in trying to push Putin. And especially as he will see that Putin is now on the back foot when it comes to what's happened through Syria and elsewhere. And he'll see that putting pressure on him as the ability to put pressure on Iran, the ability to put pressure on China and elsewhere, because he knows how much China will have invested, and Trump and China don't work well together. So whilst Trump's got the diplomatic and the geopolitical initiative on this, I don't think he's going to let it go. Meanwhile, we've got Zelensky turning around saying, I'm willing to, I'll do what you're suggesting and everything else. And Trump will then have to turn around, I think, and say, okay, you're being cooperative, you're not being cooperative, I need to teach you a lesson. The safest way to do that without putting American lives at risk is to give you additional resources. And it wouldn't surprise me if Trump gives him a huge package to really hurt Vladimir Putin in some way. Trump may tie that in, and here's where I'm speculating a little bit, into further pressure on NATO or on European nations.
Your investment.
And get them to get Europe to up its investment. And that may turn around, and here's where I'm going to stick my neck out a little bit, into him suggesting that European nations physically put troops into the western part of Ukraine to free up Ukrainian troops that are protecting against the Belarus border and elsewhere, so that they can go forward to the east and then impose over that part of Ukraine a no-fly zone. Because I don't think Putin would have the ability to respond to that. And that would force the West to then start to look at its defense expenditure and elsewhere. And Trump's already making noises about NATO nations that aren't contributing their 2%. And I wouldn't surprise me if he ups that 2% to 2.5% or 3% as a requirement, because that's still less than the Americans are putting into their defense budget. And again, Trump will be cognizant of, there are 3 major conflicts around the world that are brewing. We've got Europe with Russia, Ukraine, we've got the Middle East, and we don't know where that's going to go. And we've got a brewing threat down in Southeast Asia with China's expansionism and the things around Taiwan. And that's America's back door. That's where their primary focus is. They don't want to be taking on, from a world policeman's perspective, all 3. And therefore, I think that Trump will force Europe to step up and take a greater lead on one of them, and the one is Russia-Ukraine.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Frontline. For early access to our videos, member-only Q&As and live streams, then sign up for a membership via the link in the description. And for the latest news and breaking stories, listen to Times Radio and follow us at thetimes.com.